With how massive and liminal the ocean is, almost a living and breathing creature in its own respect, it's a miracle we manage to traverse it on a daily basis for a whole manner of different shenanigans. It shouldn't be surprising though, with such an unpredictable existence, the ocean sometimes reclaims the very ships that commute it. But what about the ships that not only don't sink, but return with less than they had originally? I.e., the whole crew is gone and nobody can figure out where they've wandered off to. Where did they go? Why is the ship still floating? What happened? And why do people always blame aliens? These mysterious vessels are usually given the creepy but somewhat inaccurate title of ghost ships, even if 10 out of 10 times they don't involve phantoms from the afterlife. Take the Mary Celeste as a famous example, a ship found in 1872 that previously contained the vessel's captain, family, and 8 other crewmates. When the derelict craft was boarded, signs of occupation were present, but nobody was on board. Nothing was stolen, nothing was out of place. What about the mysterious and often vague stories told of the Flying Dutchman? Much more of a ghostly ghost ship than the others on the list, it's probably the least real too. The Dutchman was primarily sighted around the 1900s, and a possible explanation for the sightings could have been a well-documented mirage phenomenon that occurs with ships in the ocean, which can cause an illusion of a mirror-opposite ship sailing just over the horizon. Or, maybe, the Flying Dutchman is real, and always has been aliens. As fascinating as the Flying Dutchman is, let's try and focus on events that actually happened. To begin, let's touch upon the story of the SS Bichimo, the runaway ghost ship of the Arctic. The SS Bichimo is the story of the little ghost ship that could, a vessel that never needed a crew and that floated around aimlessly for 30 years. What? How? Well, it all begins with a freshly built ship from Sweden named the SS Ångermanälven. After the end of World War One, the boat was given to Britain as war reparations and renamed the Bishimo, a much easier name to pronounce. The Bichimo was used for the same purposes by the British, as an exporter of goods, this time for fur pelts in particular. She fulfilled this job well for the next 10 years, sailing all over the world to fulfill her sacred mission. One fateful night, the Bishimo would break the chains of her human captors and escape into the night when she got trapped in early season ice near the town of Barrow, Alaska. She was very thoroughly stuck, and her crew didn't have enough resources to stay on her to wait for the ice to melt, so they hiked half a mile to the town of Barrow to supply and wait for the ice. This time they were lucky and managed to keep the disobedient ship in line. This wouldn't last long, however. She became stuck yet again in the season's ice, and half of the crew needed to be airlifted to safety by the crew's parent company. Despite warnings from their superiors, the captain and 10 other crew members decided to stay in a wooden shelter nearby to watch the ship over the winter to make sure she didn't wander off. Despite the extra precautions, a powerful blizzard struck the shelter's location that winter, and the crew were forced to stay inside the entirety of its month-long duration. When the crew re-emerged, Bichimo had finally cut all ties and left for other pursuits. The Bishimo wandered the frigid oceans for decades, being sighted multiple times by many different ships, and even reboarded on more than one occasion. The Bishimo was sighted floating around 38 years after she bid farewell to her crew, and while many believe her to have sunk by current year, there are still legends of her persisting even into the modern day. This next event is fairly speculative. It's not quite the haunted imaginings of the Flying Dutchman, and not quite the well-documented adventure that was the SS Bishimo. The Octavius legend is believed to have come from an actual event, but the story has become murky over the years, with details changing and timelines shifting every time the story was recounted. The tale of the Octavius is a good deal more sombre than the Bishimo as well, with the events of the abandonment of the ship killing the entire crew. The story goes that in 1775, a whaling ship named the Herald came across a curious looking boat floating aimlessly off the coast of Greenland. The boat appeared to be heavily weather damaged and in a state of obvious disrepair. The captain of the Herald ordered the vessel boarded immediately and its contents examined. They discovered upon boarding the ship that it was called the Octavius, and descending into the interior of the ship they found the entire crew frozen to death in their cabins, covered in blankets in what must have been a vain attempt to stop the cold. When the crew of the Herald got to the captain's quarters, they found him too, frozen, pen still gripped in hand with his journal sitting in front of him on his desk. The captain's journal was open to the last entry, which was dated from 1762, and it detailed how the ship had become hopelessly trapped in the ice of the Arctic, trying to take a shortcut through an Arctic passage. If the journal is correct, the ship would have been floating in the Arctic for 13 years before it was discovered by the Herald. Upon discovering the journal, the crew hastily left the vessel that had quickly become an icy tomb for its crew, taking nothing with them, believing the ship to be cursed. They left her adrift the same way they found her, the ship never being seen again. So is there any truth to this tale? It's hard to say, but the concept of a ship floating around the waters of the polar regions for years isn't quite as ludicrous as it would first appear, the Bishimo having done exactly that for 40 years at least. The Octavius' last known location was also very close to the town of Barrow, Alaska, just like the Bishimo, a ship lost because it became trapped in the ice. The passage the Octavius attempted to travel took 100 more years for another ship to successfully cross, giving more credence to the possibility that the story isn't merely a legend. So how do you top a story like the Octavius? Well, how about a ghost ship that's not only mysterious, but is far better documented and happened in recent memory? The Joyita was a 25-person merchant vessel that vanished when making a routine trip from Apia Harbour to the Tokelau Islands. The voyage was only supposed to last about 2 days, but the ship disappeared without a trace for 5 weeks before being discovered by another merchant ship, the Tuvalu. She was 600 miles off her original route, completely shifted onto her left side and barren. A large portion of the cargo of the ship was completely missing, and barnacles had begun to appear on the left side, meaning it was submerged for some time before being discovered. When the crew of the Tuvalu probed further, they found the dinghy and life rafts of the crew manifest were missing. The flying bridge where the ship was steered had been severely damaged. All the electronic clocks on the ship's equipment were frozen to 10:25, and all of the captain's equipment, including their firearm, was missing. Perhaps the strangest thing found was a doctor's kit on the deck of the ship, which contained both a scalpel, a stethoscope, and a series of blood-stained bandages. Despite the boat being somewhat lopsided, it was still incredibly buoyant. She survived for weeks in the condition she was found, making it all the more baffling that the crew would abandon her so quickly. More grounded theories proclaim that the ship was the result of the captain's death that happened in the voyage, as the captain would have known that the lopsided ship was still safe for all intents and purposes. It would have been much safer to stay inside the ship than it would have been to brave the night in a dinghy. The captain would have been aware of that. Another theory hypothesises that the ship was a victim of mutiny, and the captain was injured by his crew attempting to press the ship onto its destination to reclaim the damage for insurance purposes, a decision that the crew attested to and didn't respect. Whatever actually happened to the Joyita will remain a modern mystery, but whatever occurred, the captain nor the crew were ever seen or heard from again. In conclusion, not only are ghost ships less ghostly than the name would imply, they're often far scarier than ghosts because they actually exist. Not only do they exist, but they're relatively common. For instance, Japan has a reoccurring issue where hundreds of derelict North Korean boats wash up on their shores every year. These boats are usually the result of fishing vessels getting lost in the seas of Japan and dying of starvation. Or who could forget when a ship full of 11 petrified corpses just kinda showed up in Barbados? Ghost ships are out there, floating around, devoid of their original purpose, sometimes with the unfortunate crew still on board, and sometimes with more questions than answers.